Dr. Daniel sat at his workstation aboard the Asterix, his eyes glued to the flickering screen in front of him. His fingers hovered over the keys, hesitating for just a moment as he reviewed the data. The readings were strange, almost beyond explanation. It had started as a single blip, a small anomaly in the depths of space. But now, as Daniels examined it further, he could see that this was no random glitch. The signal wasn't just some mistake. It was too precise, too deliberate. His pulse quickened as he zoomed in on the patterns. It was a rhythmic pulse, almost like a heartbeat, repeating at regular intervals. The signal was faint but growing stronger, as if it was getting closer. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. There was no way this was just a coincidence. There was something or someone out there sending a message, a signal from the vast emptiness of space. "Hey, Daniels!" A voice called from behind him. It was Lieutenant Maria Collins, one of the ship's engineers. "Everything all right?" He didn't turn around, still focused on the screen. "Take a look at this." Collins moved in beside him and leaned over his shoulder. Her eyes followed the pulse, and her face grew serious. "What is it?" "It doesn't look like anything we've seen before." Daniels nodded, still analyzing the signal. "It's not human. It can't be. But it's definitely something out there." Collins raised an eyebrow. "How do you know?" Daniels turned to her. "I've studied alien signals before. Nothing like this. No patterns as complex. It's almost deliberate." "Deliberate?" Collins repeated, her tone cautious. "Like someone or something is sending it." "Exactly," Daniel said, his mind racing. "And it's not some far-off random signal either. This is coming from somewhere close. It's headed our way." Collins stepped back, her mind processing what Daniels had just said. "Should we notify the captain?" Daniels didn't answer right away. He was too absorbed in the data. The signal had grown stronger now, almost too clear to be a coincidence. He pulled up the coordinates. His eyes widened as he saw the trajectory. "It's coming straight for Earth," he muttered under his breath. "Captain should know," Collins urged again, her voice tinged with concern. Daniel shook his head slowly. "No, not yet. I want to run a few more tests first. Something about this feels wrong." Collins looked at him, worried. "You're not suggesting we're not prepared for this, are you?" He didn't answer, not because he didn't want to, but because he wasn't sure himself. There was something unnerving about the signal, something that didn't sit right with him, something that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He opened another window on his console, pulling up the ship's radar. The signal was still there, pulsing and growing in intensity, but there was something new now. A shape, faint but unmistakable, appeared on the radar screen. Daniel squinted, leaning closer to the screen. "What the hell is that?" Collins stood behind him, watching the radar. "It looks like a ship, but there's no way. Nothing out there should be moving that fast." Daniels' hands trembled slightly as he ran a few calculations. The shape was definitely moving, but far too quickly. And it wasn't just any kind of ship. This thing wasn't anything they had ever encountered before. The readings were completely off the charts. Suddenly, the alarm system blared to life, cutting to the tension in the room. The sharp, shrill tone echoed in their ears, and a red light flashed in the corner of the screen. Daniels' heart rate spiked. "Captain," he shouted, standing up. He slammed his hand on the intercom button. "Captain, we got a problem." The voice that came through the intercom was calm, but Daniels could hear the edge of concern in it. "What's going on, Daniels?" "I need you to check the radar. There's something out there, something massive, and it's coming straight for us." There was a pause, then the captain's voice, much more alert, came back. "Understood. Prepare for emergency protocols. I'll be there shortly." Daniels didn't waste any time. He hit a few more buttons, calling up the rest of the crew. His mind was racing. He had to find out what this thing was before it reached them, before it got any closer. "We need to increase the scanning power." "The radar's not picking up the full size of the object," Daniels muttered. He turned to Collins, who was still looking at the screen, her face pale. "Start locking down any loose equipment. This could get bumpy." "I'm on it." Collins replied, her voice steady, though her hands were trembling as she moved the control panel. Daniels turned his attention back to the screen. The radar was showing that the object was rapidly closing in on their position, but it was still unclear what it was. The shape was becoming clearer, but not in any way he recognized. The more he zoomed in, the more he realized that whatever it was wasn't something they had ever seen before. The object was too large, too fast, and too strange. It didn't belong in their galaxy. "Captain, the object's not slowing down," Daniels reported, his voice strained. "It's headed straight for us." There was no response, just a sound of rushing air in the intercom. Then another voice came through, not the captain's but Lieutenant Collins's, sounding more urgent than before. "Daniels," she called out, her voice cracking slightly. I think it's changing course." He rushed to the radar screen, his heart pounding. The shape was now unmistakable, a massive, dark, and elongated form. But something was wrong. It didn't just look like a ship. It looked like a living thing. The object seemed to pulse with energy, undulating in space like it was breathing. "What the hell is that?" Daniels whispered to himself, his voice barely audible. It was like nothing he had ever seen. His mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation, but there was none. He couldn't even begin to comprehend what was happening. And then, as if answering his thoughts, the radar emitted a single, piercing tone, an alarm louder than anything Daniels had ever heard. "Brace for impact," came the captain's voice over the intercom, full of urgency. Daniels barely had time to react before the entire ship shuddered, as if the very fabric of space itself was shaking. The lights flickered, and the crew scrambled to secure themselves. The radar blipped, showing that the massive object was now almost directly on top of them. But as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. The ship was plunged into silence. Everyone froze, staring at the empty space where the object had just been. No one moved. And then, just as Daniels opened his mouth to speak, the ship's radar flared once again. This time, the object was gone. It wasn't showing up anywhere on their scans. But that wasn't what terrified Daniels. What terrified him was a single low-frequency hum that suddenly filled the entire ship. It was almost like a warning, a sound coming from the very depths of space. A signal, like the one they had first discovered. And this time, it was coming from somewhere else. Something new, something bigger. And it was coming for them. The lights on the Asterix flickered again, casting eerie shadows across the control room. Dr. Daniels sat frozen, staring at the screen in front of him. The distress signal had come through clearly. A nearby abandoned space station, the Alara base, had sent out a call for help. It had been inactive for years, with no communication since the last known crew had vanished without a trace. Now, out of nowhere, the station was alive with activity, its systems suddenly blinking back to life. Daniels didn't know what to think. It didn't make sense. If the station had been abandoned for so long, what could possibly be causing a distress signal now? He wasn't sure, but one thing was clear. The Asterix was the closest ship to the Alara base, and they had to investigate. "Captain, I recommend we go check it out," Daniel said, his voice steady but tinged with the unease building in his chest. "We can't ignore it. It could be another signal we're dealing with." The captain's voice crackled through the intercom. "Agreed. Prepare your team, Daniels. We'll be heading there now." Daniels nodded, his heart racing. He turned to his team, who were already preparing for the journey. The atmosphere on board had shifted in the last few hours. Everyone was on edge, the unease palpable after the radar incident. Now, they had to investigate a mysterious, possibly dangerous distress signal. Daniels wasn't sure what they would find, but he had a feeling they weren't going to like it. Minutes later, they were docked with the Alara base. The station floated in the void, its once pristine surface now marred by age and decay. A faint hum emanated from the structure, barely perceptible against the stillness of space. Daniels led the team through the airlock, stepping into the dimly lit corridors of the station. It felt cold, abandoned, but not completely empty. The first thing Daniels noticed was the silence. No hum of machinery, no voices, just a distant echo of their footsteps as they moved down the hallway. It was as if the station had been frozen in time. The faint glow of their helmets' lights illuminated the walls, which were covered in strange symbols that didn't belong to any human language. The shapes were curiously alien, their meanings elusive but unmistakable. Daniels felt a shiver run down his spine. "Did you see that?" Lieutenant Collins whispered as she pointed to the wall. Her voice echoed in the empty station. Daniels followed her gaze, noticing the strange markings. "No idea what that is," he muttered, "but it doesn't look like anything I've ever seen." The team continued their search, moving cautiously through the abandoned corridors. The further they went, the more unsettling the atmosphere became. The walls seemed to close in on them, the air growing colder, the silence almost oppressive. They came across signs of a struggle. Overturned chairs, broken equipment, and pools of dried blood. "What happened here?" Collins asked, her voice barely a whisper. The tension in her tone was clear. Whatever had happened to the crew of the Alara base, it wasn't something they were prepared to understand. Daniels shook his head. "I don't know, but we're getting closer to the truth." They reached the central chamber of the station, a large room with a control panel that had long since stopped working. Daniels felt an odd pull in his chest, something drawing him toward a hidden door at the back of the room. It was barely noticeable, just a faint outline on the wall, but something about it felt important. He approached it carefully, scanning the area. Collins followed closely behind him, her flashlight casting eerie shadows as she stepped forward. "Dr. Daniels," she said, her voice tense, "what do you think is behind that door?" "I'm not sure, but I intend to find out," Daniels replied, his hand resting on the door's handle. The door slid open with a low hiss, revealing a dark room inside. The air was stale, thick with dust and the scent of something long forgotten. They stepped inside, and Daniels immediately felt a sense of dread wash over him. The room was filled with old computer terminals, their screens flickering weakly in the darkness. At the far end of the room, a single terminal remained powered on. The monitor displayed a series of cryptic messages, their meaning incomprehensible at first glance. But one thing stood out, a warning in bold red letters. "Never make contact." Daniels' heart raced. What could this mean? The message was clear, but why had it been left behind? He stepped forward, carefully examining the rest of the data. What he found sent a cold shiver through his body. There were logs, records of encounters with something not human, extraterrestrial life forms, far more advanced than anything Earth had encountered. The logs spoke of strange signals, encounters with ships that shouldn't exist, and terrifying warnings about making contact. "It's all here," Daniels muttered, his voice hoarse. "They knew something. They saw something. And they paid the price." Collins leaned over his shoulder, looking at the data. But if they knew all this, why didn't they leave? Why didn't they warn anyone? Before Daniels could answer, a loud bang echoed through the station. They both froze, looking around in alarm. The sound came from deep within the station, somewhere far off in the darkness. "Let's move," Daniels said urgently. He gestured to the rest of the team. "We need to get out of here. Now." As they began to leave the room, something caught Daniels' eye. A faint movement in the shadows, just beyond the edge of his light. He turned quickly, but there was nothing there, only darkness. "Did you see that?" he asked, his voice shaky. Collins glanced around nervously. "No, but I heard something." The crew moved quickly down the hall, the urgency in their steps growing with each passing second. As they reached the airlock, Daniels felt a strange chill creep up his spine. The air felt heavier, thicker, as if something was watching them. They moved faster now, each member of the crew tense, ready for whatever was lurking in the darkness. Suddenly, one of the crew members, a young officer named Jordan, stopped, his face pale as he stared into the shadows. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice trembling. Before anyone could respond, Jordan screamed. It was a short, sharp cry, cut off in an instant. Daniel spun around, his heart stopping for a moment as he realized Jordan was gone, vanished, as if swallowed by the shadows themselves. "Jordan!" Daniel shouted, running back toward the spot where the officer had been. But it was too late. There was no sign of him. The station was empty once again. Where did he go? Collins gasped, her face pale with fear. I don't know, Daniels whispered, his voice shaking. But whatever is on this station, it's not done with us yet. The air around them grew colder, and the lights flickered once more. The ship's engines hummed faintly, ready to leave, but Daniels knew they weren't safe. Not yet. As they moved toward the airlock, Daniels couldn't shake the feeling that something was still following them. Something they couldn't see, but could feel in the air, waiting, watching. And as they sealed the door behind them and left the station, the last thing Daniels saw was the faintest movement in the darkness, like something or someone lurking just out of reach. They were not alone. And whatever had taken Jordan was still out there. The Asterix was quiet as it glided to the void of space, its engines humming a soft, steady rhythm. Dr. Daniels sat alone in the control room, his eyes fixed on the monitors in front of him. The distress signal from the Alara base still haunted him. The cryptic warning, the eerie symbols. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that they had stumbled onto something far bigger than they realized. He rubbed his eyes, trying to focus. His mind kept drifting back to the station, to the strange movements in the shadows, to Jordan's sudden disappearance. What could have taken him? What had they found? Suddenly, a soft beat broke his thoughts. Daniels turned his attention to the console, where a new alert was flashing, a minor fluctuation in the ship's systems. Nothing major, but strange enough to catch his attention. He was about to check it out when the ship's lights flickered, casting strange shadows across the room. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He wasn't alone. He stood up quickly, his breath catching in his throat. Something was off. His gut was telling him something wasn't right. He walked slowly down the corridor, his footsteps echoing in the silence of the ship. The crew was asleep, the rest of the ship eerily still. As he reached the main hallway, he saw it, a shadow at the far end of the hall, barely visible in the low light. Daniels froze. His heart skipped a beat. He thought he saw movement, a figure standing just out of sight. He took a step forward, his pulse racing. Slowly, cautiously, he made his way toward the figure. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if the air itself was thickening around him. The figure moved again, and Daniels instinctively stepped back. He reached for the comms device on his belt and called out to the crew, "Everyone, get up. We've got an intruder." But the only response was static. Daniels gritted his teeth, frustration building. He was about to make another call when the shadow moved again, this time stepping into the dim light. Daniels' breath caught in his throat. It wasn't human. It wasn't even close. The creature stood before him, tall and thin, its form twisted in unnatural ways. Its body was covered in a slick, dark exoskeleton that seemed to shimmer in the low light. Its face, or what passed for a face, was a nightmarish blend of sharp angles and empty sockets. A long, serpentine appendage slithered from its back, its eyes glowing an eerie green. It didn't speak, but its gaze seemed to peer straight through him, its cold, alien intelligence studying him like a specimen. Daniels' mind raced, trying to process what he was seeing. The thing wasn't just an alien, it was something else. Something ancient. Something that had no place in the universe they knew. He backed away slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. The creature didn't move at first, watching him intently, its presence pressing down on him like a weight. Daniels reached for his weapon, but stopped. What good would it do? This thing wasn't like anything they had ever encountered. He had no idea how to fight it. The creature tilted its head, its movements slow and deliberate, as if studying him. It didn't seem aggressive, but the sheer otherworldly presence was enough to send a chill through his bones. It was like it was waiting for something, learning, adapting to their movements, as if it could understand them. Daniel swallowed hard, tried to keep his voice steady. "What do you want?" he asked, his words barely above a whisper. The creature didn't respond with words, but a strange, guttural sound rumbled in its chest. Daniels froze, not sure whether to be terrified or fascinated. It was like the creature was trying to communicate, but the language was foreign, alien to his ears. And then, after a long, tense moment, the creature spoke. Judgment. The word echoed in Daniels' mind, sending a shiver through him. He had no idea what it meant, but he could feel the weight of it. The creature wasn't just a visitor. It was a harbinger of something that couldn't be ignored. Before Daniels could react, the creature vanished into the shadows, its form dissolving into the darkness of the hallway. The lights flickered again, and Daniels stood there, frozen, trying to process what had just happened. Was it a hallucination? No, the fear in his chest was too real, too solid. He didn't know what to do. He couldn't stay there alone, not now. He turned and sprinted back to the control room, his heart hammering in his chest. The creature's words echoed in his mind, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they had just entered something far bigger than themselves. He reached the control room, breathing heavily. His hands shook as he tried to contact the rest of the crew. "Captain, this is Dr. Daniels. We got a problem." Static. The comms were still dead. Damn it! Daniels swore under his breath. His mind raced, but he couldn't make sense of anything. The alien, whatever it was, had been on board, and it wasn't the only one. Something was happening. Something terrible. Suddenly, the ship jolted, throwing Daniels off his feet. The lights went out completely, plunging him into darkness. He fumbled for his flashlight, his pulse racing as the ship's emergency alarms began to blare. Something was wrong. Very wrong. He turned the flashlight on, the beam cutting to the darkness, revealing nothing but empty hallways and flickering lights. But as his light swept across the room, he saw it. Another shadow. This time, it wasn't just one figure. There were many. The creatures were everywhere, their glowing eyes piercing the dark, their forms shifting in the shadows like specters. Daniels' breath caught his throat as the first of them stepped forward. It wasn't the same creature as before, but it was just as terrifying. It opened its mouth, revealing rows of jagged teeth, and let out a screech that rattled Daniels' bones. Before he could react, the lights came back on and the creatures disappeared. But the fear lingered, thick in the air. Daniels was sure of one thing now. Whatever was happening, it wasn't over. It had only just begun. Dr. Daniels sat in his quarters, the walls of the Asterix pressing in around him. The small room felt suffocating, as though the air itself was thicker than it had been before. His mind kept racing, circling back to the creature he had seen. The shadow that moved so unnaturally, the chilling word it had spoken, judgment. He couldn't shake the feeling that something far worse than just the aliens they'd encountered was coming. There was a larger game at play, one that they hadn't even begun to understand. The signals they had decoded were not random. They were deliberate. The warning they had received from the Alara base, the strange symbols, the vanishings, none of it had been coincidence. Suddenly, the door to his quarters slid open, and Captain Reyes stepped in, her face grim. "Daniels, we need to talk. Now." Daniels stood up, trying to shake the exhaustion from his mind. He knew this moment was coming. They had all been hoping for some kind of breakthrough, some piece of evidence that would explain the strange happenings. But all they had now were questions, and the answers were becoming more terrifying with each passing hour. Reyes motioned for him to follow, and he did, falling in step behind her as she led him through the ship. Her expression was one of resolve, but Daniels could see the edge of fear in her eyes. "We've been getting more signals," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the hum of the ship. "Stronger ones this time. And they're not just coming from that station. They're coming from everywhere." Daniels' stomach dropped. His worst fears were starting to take shape. The two of them reached the main bridge, where the rest of the crew was waiting. Lieutenant Morgan, a seasoned navigator, was hunched over a console, furiously typing on the keyboard. He looked up as they entered, his face pale. "Dr. Daniels, Captain, you need to see this." Daniels approached the console, leaning over Morgan's shoulder. The screen flickered, displaying patterns of numbers and strange symbols. At first glance, it seemed like nothing more than a garbled mess, but Daniels recognized the sequence. They had seen similar patterns before, during their initial investigation of the signals. These aren't just random signals," Daniels said, his voice shaking with a mix of disbelief and growing terror. "This is an ancient language. The aliens are trying to communicate." Morgan nodded grimly. "We've been able to isolate some of the signals. We think they're a warning." Daniels felt his heart race. The Alara base had been right. The aliens were trying to tell them something. But what? The screen blinked, and a new sequence of symbols appeared. They were more complex than the others, shifting and rearranging themselves in a pattern that made Danielle's head spin. What are they trying to say? Captain Reyes asked, her voice strained. Daniel stared at the screen, trying to make sense of the symbols. The meaning was elusive, like trying to catch a shadow. But as he focused, he began to see a pattern emerging. He ran his fingers over the symbols, repeating them in his mind. Then it hit him. They're not just warning us, he whispered, his voice filled with horror. They're telling us something else. Something worse. Captain Reyes looked at him, her expression unreadable. What do you mean? The aliens we've been encountering, they're not the first ones. They're part of something older, something much darker. Daniels felt a chill run down his spine as the realization struck him. These aliens weren't just explorers or conquerors. They were messengers, and the message they were carrying was not just for humanity. It was for all species. The message was a warning that something far worse was coming. He turned toward the crew, his mind racing. These aliens, they've been watching us. All along. They've been here for centuries, waiting for something. They've been studying us, learning from us. And now they've decided it's time to act. But why? Lieutenant Morgan asked, his voice full of disbelief. Why now? Daniel swallowed hard, his gaze drifting to the blinking screens. Because we're no longer the apex species. The words hung heavy in the air, settling on them like a weight. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, their minds trying to process the enormity of what Daniels had just said. They had always believed humanity was at the top of the food chain, that they were the masters of their own fate. But now that illusion was shattered. Daniels could see the fear in their eyes, and it mirrored the terror he felt inside. They had stumbled into something much larger than themselves, something they couldn't even begin to comprehend. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, casting the bridge in an eerie, dim glow. The hum of the ship seemed to grow louder, almost vibrating through the walls. Daniel stepped away from the console, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel it. Something was coming, something that they couldn't stop. The ship lurched suddenly, throwing Daniels and the crew off balance. The lights flickered wildly, then went out completely, leaving them in total darkness. Get to the emergency stations. Captain Reyes shouted, her voice sharp and commanding. Now! The crew scrambled, trying to make sense of the situation. Daniels could hear the panic rising in their voices as they rushed to their assigned stations. The ship's alarms blared, but the sound was muffled by the dark, oppressive silence that had settled over them. Daniels felt the ship lurch again, this time harder than before. He stumbled, catching himself against the wall. The feeling of dread was overwhelming, as if something was just beyond their reach, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. And then, as quickly as the chaos had started, it stopped. Silence. The crew stood frozen, their breath coming in short, panicked bursts. The lights flickered back on, dim and weak, and the ship's systems hummed back to life. But something had changed. The air was thick with a sense of impending doom, as if they were standing on the edge of something terrifying. Daniels felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. There was something else on the ship, something they hadn't seen yet. The alien's words echoed in his mind. Judgment. Before Daniels could speak, a voice in his head whispered, faint but clear, they're not the only ones watching. There's something older, darker, and far more dangerous out there. Daniel's blood ran cold as the voice faded away, leaving only the sound of his own heartbeat in his ears. Something far worse was coming, and this time there would be no warning. The crew of the Asterex had been silent for hours, staring at the screens, watching as the stars shifted. Dr. Daniels couldn't tear his eyes away from the patterns that had emerged. The data was undeniable. The stars themselves were changing, aligning in a way that defied logic, a pattern that couldn't be ignored. Something was coming. And it wasn't just the alien force they had already encountered. This was far worse. Something that had been asleep for millennia, waiting for this exact moment. Daniel stood in front of the main control panel, his hands gripping the edges of the console. Sweat clung to his brow, but he didn't wipe it away. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything. He couldn't. Every instinct he had screamed that something was wrong. Something ancient and terrifying was awakening in the dark reaches of space. "Captain," he said, his voice hoarse, "it's happening. The stars, they're aligning in a way that indicates something bigger. Something older than the species we've encountered. This is no longer just a warning. It's a signal." Captain Reyes stood beside him, her face pale as she looked at the data on the screen. The others in the crew remained quiet, unable to process what they were seeing. "This is impossible," Lieutenant Morgan murmured, shaking his head. "We've been studying the stars for years, and no one has ever seen anything like this. This isn't just a pattern. It's intentional." "It's not just the stars," Daniels replied. "The entire galaxy is shifting. The alignment is happening all across the system, in ways we can't even comprehend. The species we've been encountering, they're scouts. They've been sent to prepare for the arrival of something far more dangerous." "What exactly are we dealing with?" Reyes asked, her voice filled with dread. "And why have we only just noticed?" Daniels ran a hand through his hair, his mind churning with the possibilities. "It's been here all along. We've just never been able to see it. But now the time has come. Something is awakening. The aliens, the ones we met, they're part of a much bigger plan. They've been monitoring us, preparing us for the arrival of their true masters. They've been waiting for us to reach this point, and now we've triggered something we were never meant to." The crew stood still, absorbing his words. The silence that followed felt heavy, like the weight of the universe had just settled on their shoulders. "Should we try to communicate?" Lieutenant Morgan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Daniels shook his head. "No, the communication we've received so far isn't meant for us. We're not ready for what comes next." The ship lurched suddenly, sending everyone off balance. The lights flickered, and alarms blared across the Asterex. The ground shook beneath their feet, a deep rumbling that came from nowhere. Daniels felt the ship's hull tremble, as though something massive was moving outside. It wasn't just a ship reacting to something. Something out there in space was sending vibrations through the vessel, something so large and so powerful that even the ship couldn't remain steady. "What was that?" Reyes shouted, gripping the edge of the console. "What's happening?" Daniels rushed to the nearest window, staring out into the vast, dark expanse of space. His eyes widened as he saw it, a shape massive and black, moving through the void. It blocked out the stars behind it, casting an unnatural shadow over the Asterex. The object was huge, its shape indistinct, almost impossible to comprehend. But one thing was certain. It was not something human, and it was far beyond anything they had ever encountered. "What the hell is that?" Lieutenant Morgan gasped, stepping up beside Daniels. Daniels could barely speak. His mind was trying to process the impossible sight before him. He knew, deep down, that whatever it wasn't just an alien ship. It was something much older, something far more ancient than any species they had encountered. This was the true force behind the signals, behind the scouts that had led them here. "It's here," Daniels whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. "It's awake." The object outside the ship grew larger as they watched, its form taking shape. It was a massive structure, far too large to comprehend. It had no identifiable markings, no features that made sense to the human eye. It was as if it was simply a presence, an ancient thing that existed beyond the laws of space and time. Its surface shimmered, reflecting the faint light from distant stars, creating an eerie glow that made it look alive. The ship's alarms blared louder, and the crew rushed to their stations, trying to regain control of the situation. But it was clear they were powerless. This was beyond them. There was no stopping it, no fighting it. "What do we do now?" Captain Reyes asked, her voice filled with helplessness. Daniels didn't answer. He didn't have an answer. The situation had escalated beyond anything they could have imagined. The crew was out of their depth, and the danger they were facing was unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. "We wait," Daniels said quietly, his voice hollow. "We wait and hope that we're not the next to awaken something worse." Suddenly, the lights in the Asterex flickered once more, and the ship's systems went offline. The alarm stopped, leaving a deafening silence. In the stillness, Daniels could hear the beating of his own heart in his ears, loud and frantic. And then, with a terrible certainty, the object outside the ship began to move toward them. It was not a slow, gradual movement. It was as if the ship was drawn to them, a magnetic force pulling them closer and closer. Daniels felt his chest tighten, the air growing heavy around him. His thoughts raced, but there was no time to process them. The crew was no longer in control of their fate. Whatever was outside that ship, it was coming for them, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. A deep, bone-shaking rumble echoed through the hull, and the ship trembled as if something was trying to break through. The windows vibrated, the sound of cracking metal filling the air. Daniels knew, in that moment, that this was just the beginning. And then, as quickly as it had all started, the ship went still. Outside the Asterix, the enormous shadow of the ancient alien force loomed. It was almost within reach now, a dark shape that blocked out the stars. And with it, the terrifying certainty that humanity had just crossed a threshold they could never return from. The Asterix sat in the cold void of space, suspended between the stars. It was quiet, too quiet. The crew stood in their stations, eyes locked on the screens. But nothing could prepare them for what was about to come. Dr. Daniels looked out the window, his gaze fixed on the massive alien ship looming just beyond the view. The shape was even larger now, casting an ominous shadow over the Asterix, blocking out the light from the distant stars. The ship had drawn closer, its sheer size and presence suffocating. "They're almost here," Captain Reyes said, her voice a mix of fear and resignation. She stood at the command console, her hands gripping the edges, her knuckles white. "We need to decide. Now!" Dr. Daniels couldn't look away from the screen. The alien ship had been sending strange signals, too, messages that made no sense but carried with them an undeniable weight. He felt it in his bones. The ship wasn't just a force to be reckoned with. It was a message, and whatever message it had, they were the ones who had triggered it. Earth had reached its breaking point. "What are our options?" Lieutenant Morgan asked, his voice shaking. "We can't just sit here and wait for them to destroy us." Dr. Daniels turned to face him. "We have two choices," he said slowly. "Fight or run." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Fighting an alien force as powerful seemed impossible, but fleeing didn't feel much better. Either way, they were running out of time. The tension in the air was palpable, each second stretching longer than the last. Daniels could feel his pulse quicken as the weight of the decision pressed down on him. "We've tried everything we can," Lieutenant Morgan said. "We've sent distress signals, tried to communicate. It's clear they're not interested in talking. They're here for something else. They want us to know," Dr. Daniels muttered to himself, "more to understand the truth than to speak aloud. They want humanity to understand that we're no longer in control." The idea settled like a lead weight in his stomach. For the first time, Daniels realized what the aliens were doing. This wasn't just an attack. This was their way of showing humanity its place in the universe. They had been watching for centuries, waiting for the right moment to come. And now, they were sending a message that couldn't be ignored. Humanity had no say in the matter anymore. "We don't even know what they want from us," Captain Reyes said, her voice cracking with fear. "We have no way of knowing how far they'll go to make us understand." "They won't stop until they've shown us our weakness," Daniels replied. "This is Judgment Day for Earth. We can either face it or flee and pray that we survive." Fleeing seemed like the only option, but even then, Daniels knew it might not save them. The alien ship was closing in fast, and if they ran, would they be able to outrun it? Would they be able to escape whatever consequences the aliens had in store? The thought of running terrified him, but fighting back seemed even more hopeless. "They're coming for us, and they know everything about us," Dr. Daniels said, his voice cold with realization. "We're not prepared for this." "We can't just let them take us without a fight," Lieutenant Morgan said, his eyes burning with determination. "There has to be something we can do." Daniels shook his head. "We don't know enough about them. Every attempt we've made to understand them has only pushed them closer to us. If we try to fight, we might provoke something even worse." The silence that followed was deafening. The crew stood, frozen in place, caught between two impossible choices: fight and risk everything, or run and hope that somehow they could escape this nightmare. But in the back of Daniel's mind, a terrifying thought took root. What if there was no escaping this at all? What if the aliens weren't just here to destroy them, but to remind them of their place in the universe? What if they were meant to be a lesson? "We're running out of time," Captain Reyes said, her voice firm. "We have to make a choice. We can't just sit here." Daniels looked at her, his heart racing. He couldn't believe what he was about to say, but it felt like the only way. "We try to fight." The words hung in the air like a heavy cloud. The crew stared at him in disbelief. "Dr. Daniels, are you sure?" Captain Reyes asked. "We don't know if we can stop them. We don't know if we can even make it out of here alive." "I don't think we can outrun them," Daniels said quietly. "But maybe we can buy ourselves enough time to figure out how to escape." There was a long pause before Captain Reyes nodded. "All right, prepare for a fight. All hands to battle stations. We don't have much time." As the crew scrambled into action, Daniels felt a chill run down his spine. He had made a decision to fight, but deep down he feared it was the wrong one. The ship's alarm blared, and the crew rushed to their stations, preparing for whatever was coming. Every minute counted now. Every decision was a matter of life or death. But then, just as they were about to make their final move, the ship's communication system came alive. A message, a final transmission, crackled through the speakers. "It's them," Daniels whispered. A voice, cold and alien, echoed through the ship's systems. The words were clear, and they chilled him to the bone. "The end is near," the voice said. "You cannot escape." The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. Daniels felt a cold sweat run down his back as the weight of what was coming settled upon him. There was no running from this. There was no escaping it. The alien ship was here for them, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. The crew stood in stunned silence, realizing that whatever they had chosen to do, the outcome was already sealed. They were now part of a much larger plan, one that had been set in motion long before they had ever stepped foot on the Astriex. Whatever came next, there was no way to avoid it. And with that, the realization hit home. This was no longer just a fight for survival. This was humanity's judgment day. The countdown clock on the main console flashed red. Dr. Daniel stared at it, heart pounding. There was no turning back now. Every decision, every move had led to this moment. The Asterix was humanity's last line of defense, and the aliens outside had no mercy. The fate of Earth rested in the hands of the crew aboard this ship. "Prepare the weapons," Captain Reyes barked, her voice sharp and full of determination. "We make our stand here, or we die trying." The crew moved quickly, each person knowing the stakes. The alien ship, massive and dark, hung just outside the Asterix, casting a shadow that seemed to swallow the stars around it. Its presence was suffocating, and every heartbeat felt like it could be the last. Dr. Daniels walked to the weapons console, his mind racing. They had limited resources, limited time, and no guarantee that anything they did would work. But he knew one thing for certain: this wasn't just about survival. This was about showing the aliens that humanity wasn't going to kneel before them. It was about proving that humanity still had a place in the universe. "Status report," Daniel said, turning to Lieutenant Morgan, who was at the radar console. "Everything's set," Morgan replied, his voice tense. "We got the main guns charged, and the shields are at full power. But we're going to need more than this if we want to stand a chance." Daniels nodded. They had no choice. There was nothing left to lose. "Send out the distress signal," Captain Reyes ordered. "We need reinforcements. Even if it's just one ship, we need help." "Message sent," Daniel said, tapping in the coordinates. He could only pray that someone on Earth had heard their distress call, though he knew it was a long shot. The alien fleet was massive, and they were outmatched. But they couldn't just give up. Not now. "Targets locked," Lieutenant Morgan said, his fingers flying over the console. "Firing in 3, 2, 1. The sound of weapons firing shook the Asterix as the main cannons unleashed a barrage of energy at the alien ship. The impact sent shockwaves through the ship, and the crew braced themselves. The alien vessel barely reacted. The blast seemed to dissipate as they struck its massive hull, leaving only small burns behind. "They're too strong," Lieutenant Morgan muttered. "We need to find another way." Dr. Daniels stepped forward, his mind spinning. He had spent years studying alien technology, but nothing could have prepared him for this. The aliens were ancient, their technology far beyond anything humanity had ever dreamed of. But even so, he refused to give in. They were fighting for more than just survival. They were fighting for everything. "Captain, we need to try a different approach," Daniel said. "We need to disrupt their communications. If we can break their link, we might be able to disorient them." Captain Reyes considered this for a moment, then nodded. "Make it happen. Everyone get ready. We're not just fighting for our lives. We're fighting for humanity's future." The crew scrambled into action. Daniels and his team worked quickly to reprogram the ship systems, rerouting power to the ship's communications array. They needed to send a powerful signal, one that could break the alien fleet's coordination. It was a long shot, but it was the only chance they had. Dr. Daniels' hands trembled as he tapped the final command into the console. "It's done. Now we wait." The ship shuddered again as the alien ship retaliated, firing back with a blast that rocked the Asterix to its core. The lights flickered and alarms blared. The crew held on tight as the ship spun and jerked, trying to maintain control. "Shields holding," Lieutenant Morgan reported, though his voice betrayed his fear. "But they're pushing us back." "We can't hold on much longer," Captain Reyes said, her voice tight with urgency. "What's the status on that signal?" Dr. Daniels looked at the screen, his eyes narrowing. "It's working." They're confused. The fleet's disoriented. With the aliens' communications disrupted, their attacks became less coordinated. The alien ship continued to fire, but the shots were wild and unfocused. The Asterix took advantage of the chaos, returning fire with everything they had. For a moment, Daniels allowed himself to believe they might have a chance. But then, something changed. The alien ship, still massive and terrifying, began to glow. At first, it was faint, a soft light, barely visible against the darkness of space. But then it grew brighter, brighter than anything Daniels had ever seen. The ship seemed to pulse with energy, and Daniels' heart skipped a beat. He could feel it. The alien ship wasn't just retaliating. It was evolving, adapting, becoming something else entirely. "They're powering up," Lieutenant Morgan said, his voice full of disbelief. This isn't like anything we've seen." Dr. Daniel's stomach churned as he watched the ship's energy reading spike. This wasn't just an alien warship anymore. It was something else, something far worse. He didn't know what was coming, but he could feel the growing dread in his bones. "They're calling in reinforcements," Captain Reyes said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "We need to stop them. Now." Daniels turned to the crew, his mind racing. They had one final chance to end this, before the aliens brought in whatever horrors they had in store. "Prepare for a final strike," he ordered. "This is our last shot." The crew braced themselves. The countdown to their final attack began, and Daniels felt his pulse racing. The Asterix fired one last shot, a concentrated beam of energy aimed directly at the alien ship's core. The energy crackled, burning through the void, and for a brief moment, Daniels thought they might actually succeed. But just as the beam hit its target, something incredible happened. The alien ship shimmered and then vanished. The beam passed through empty space, leaving nothing behind. Dr. Daniels stood frozen, his mind reeling. What had just happened? Had they succeeded, or had they only made things worse? Then the true horror emerged. From the depths of space, far beyond the reach of the Asterix, another ship appeared. It was like nothing Daniels had ever seen. Its size dwarfed the alien ship that had attacked them. The ship was dark, its surface reflecting nothing but the blackness of space. It exuded a presence so cold, so alien, that Daniels felt his body freeze. The ship was coming for them, and as it approached, a voice, distant and haunting, echoed to the Asterix speakers. "This is not the end. This is only the beginning." The message was clear. The true